Good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Hey in Masechet Chullin. We are in the second day of the eighth perek, which discusses the laws of Basar B'chalav. Let me share my screen, and we will really get started. So yesterday we started the eighth chapter of Chullin and the discussion of the prohibition of consuming meat with milk. At the end of the day yesterday, we introduced the idea of washing hands and cleansing one's mouth between eating milk and meat. As we begin at the start of the second to last line of Kuf Dalet Amabet, the Gemara quotes a brisa. So, Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Beis Shammai Omrim Mikaneach. Beis Shammai says that you need to do some kind of wiping, and understood to be some kind of wiping of your mouth. Ubeit Hillel Omrim Meidiach. No, you have to do. It's not wiping; it's rinsing. Again, applying it in many Rishonim understand that this is all talking about what you need to do inside your mouth. So, my mekaneach umay mediach. What do we mean by these things, and what's the difference between them? Meaning, what's so ilema Beis Shammai omrim mekaneach v'lo boy mediach. Maybe Beis Shammai says that you need to wipe the mouth, but you don't need to rinse the mouth. Ubeit Hillel omrim mediach v'lo boy mekaneach. And Beit Hillel says you need to rinse the mouth and you do not need to wipe the mouth. But Ela Hada Amar Rabbi Zera Ein Kinuach Peh Ela Bepat, that when it comes to wiping of the mouth, it means eating something else. It means eating bread, and specifically only bread. Well, come on. If he's saying that the halacha is that you need to engage in this, because that's the implication of his statement, and he's doing a statement that involves wiping, well, kinuach. Well, kinuach was something that Beit Shammai said. So what are you saying, Kiman? Are you telling me Beit Hillel that he is holding like Beit Shammai? Excuse me, that he's holding like Beit Shammai? That can't be. We don't paskin like Beit Shammai, and so as a result, Rabbi Zera wouldn't have said something that is solely according to Beit Shammai. So we give a second possible explanation. Beit Shammai omrim mikaneach v'lo boy midiyach. That Rabbi Beit Shammai is saying that you need to do the wiping, and of course you also need to do rinsing. Ubeit Hillel omrim af mediach. No, I'm sorry. Below by, I'm sorry, but this case of below by is you don't need to do, and he would not need to do rinsing. He does only wiping, and he does not need to do rinsing. So it's wiping without rinsing is what Beit Shammai says. Ubeit Hillel omrim af mediach. No, you have to, of course, you have to wipe, but you also need to rinse. And so, well, Habilei Mikule Beis Shammai v'chumrei Beis Hillel. Well, now, if you're going to understand it that way, well, then this would be a leniency of Beit Shammai, because Beit Shammai says you only need to wipe and you don't need to rinse. And Beit Hillel would have a stringency because he says you need to do both wiping and rinsing. Well, then we should have listed this in the list of items in which Beit Shammai is more lenient and Beit Hillel is more machmir. They are all in Maseches Edios, various testimonies that were given in connection with a variety of items. And one of the things that is discussed there are all of the examples of leniencies of Beit Shammai and stringencies of Beit Hillel, as we saw yesterday. Because we saw that one of the items is with respect to whether or not there is a prohibition of having both meat and milk on the table at the same time, where Beit Shammai is more lenient and Beit Hillel is more strict. So that can't be either, because we would have listed this there. So Ella, rather, we come up with a third possible answer. Beit Shammai omrim mikaneach v'hu adon l'madiach. That when Beit Shammai is telling us you have to wipe, of course you also have to rinse. As Rashi tells us, v'hu adin de tarvayu. This is Rashi 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines down in the narrow lines of Rashi on Kuf Hey Amud Aleph. V'hu adin de tarvayu b'inan. That you need to do both. You need to both rinse and wipe. Ubeit Hillel omrim mediach v'hu adin l'mikaneach. So Mar Amar Chada, Umar Amar Chada. So they're really all saying the same thing, Velo Pligi, and they're not arguing. And so that is how we conclude this discussion. That even though Beit Shammai said you need to wipe and Beis Hillel says you need to rinse, that in fact the two actions of the two requirements of the two of them involve both wiping and rinsing. They both say that you need to do both. And actually, this is an area in which Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai actually agree. Okay, so we quoted Rabbi Zera, so let's take a look at that statement more fully. Gufa, Rabbi Zera, en kinu chapeh el befas. Again, the key element that we quoted before was the fact that when it comes to wiping, it refers to using bread. And now Rabbi Zera goes on and says something that was not quoted earlier, that when we say that you need to do wiping with bread, it means wheat bread from chitim. Aval b'disa'are lo, but not from barley bread. That would not work. And Rashi explains why. B'disa'are lo, it's the next Rashi, and so now it began on the ninth line and is now on the 10th line of the narrow lines on Kuf Hey Amud Aleph. Mimnesha misparer b'toch peh. Well, when you have barley bread, it falls apart, it crumbles in one's mouth. Ve'enu nikshar yachad, and therefore is not going to stay as a single set of dough, and kishalo aso, when you chew it. And so as a result, the whole point is sort of like chewing gum. You want it to be to stay together enough that it will wipe out and collect all of the stuff that you already have in your mouth. Lefikach eino mikanech, and so as a result, but here it's going to fall apart, and so as a result, you don't really need to chew it. You don't, and therefore, and it's not going to turn into some kind of paste or something like that that will end up cleaning out your mouth, and so as a result, it's not considered a sufficient wiping. Udachite, and now back into the Gemara. So we are one, two, three. Okay. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 lines down in the Gemara, middle of the line. Udechite, and when we say that you need to use wheat bread, nami lo amran ela bikarira. We're only talking about cold bread, because if it's warm, abal bechamimi mishtar deshatre. But when it's warm, it sticks to your to the inside of your mouth, and so as a result, it's not going to clear out your mouth of food. Vahani mili barakicha, and also this applies only to soft bread, meaning that you can only do soft bread with it. Aval b'kakshusa, aval b'akusha, low. But with hard bread, you can't deal with it. And why can't you deal with it? Rashi tells us. So now it's the last word on the line, 3, 6, 9, 12, 14 lines down. Now 15 lines down. Akusha, kasha yoter, because it's very hard. Kosher yoter midai, because it's harder than necessary. V'gamhu misparo, it will end up crumbling. B'tocha peh, inside the mouth. Kishel sa'orim, so as a result, it has the same problem as bread of sa'orim. So if it's a little bit older, the bread, and it's still not soft, that's not going to work. So it's very delicate balance, according to Rebbe Zera, that of what you need to use. It can't be too sticky, because if it sticks to the inside of your mouth, and so that's what the story would be if it was hot bread, hot wheat bread, that would be a problem. And it can't be too crumbly, because then it will fall apart and it will not end up clearing your mouth. But that's not the halacha. Back into the Gemara, as we say, let me find it. 1, 2, 3. It's the last word on the line, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 lines down in the Gemara. Last word on the line. V'hilchasa b'kol mili havi kinuach. No, really the halacha is that you can do the wiping, clearing out of your mouth by eating something else. Levad mikimcha tamre v'yarka. The only things you can't do are use flour, which of course, when you put a little bit of liquid on it, it becomes very sticky. That's dough. Tamre, dates, which are extraordinarily sticky. V'yarka, and presumably cooked vegetables. And Rashi tells us why are all these problems? Rakinhain, they're all extraordinarily soft. And so as a result, obviously we're not talking about dates that have been dried out, etc. We're talking about more fresh dates, so very fresh dates where it's all very, very soft. And so as a result, you don't need to chew it very much. And therefore, it's going to, and it's maybe even hard to chew. And therefore, it's not going to do the job. But pretty much everything else will be okay. And that, in fact, is what we say, that if you're going to have meat after cheese, or after non-hard cheese, but regular cheese, well, then you should make sure to eat something in between, and you should wash your mouth out. So
it's very interesting. I find that the Gemara uses the word kinuach, because normally when one thinks of washing and wiping, you think of some water, wash out the mouth. But the word kinuach means dessert. And that's in Hebrew, modern Hebrew. Kinuch is dessert. So it's interesting that in some there is a custom among some people that is debatable if one should make a bracha on a dessert or not. Some do, some don't. I'm not getting into, but among those who say that there's a way around it, at the end of the meal, if they eat a piece of bread with their cake or with their applesauce, then that can, in some measure, exempt them from an extra bracha because they're still eating bread. That's part of the meal. So it's interesting they used bread here as one of the kinuach when kinuach is a dessert.
Yeah, well, of course, the reason that it may be called kinuach is because what it is doing is wiping your mouth clean of all the palate cleanser at the end of the meal. So it's all related, and in fact, you should koach on that. You're highlighting the fact that sort of the Torah can actually incorporate into our daily language understanding of modern Hebrew. So Yeshikoach. So, and I think two things with that respect to that. I think that in general, we say that if you have hamotzi or mizonos, we generally say that you don't make a bracha on the dessert. But if you're having just fruit, then that's considered not part of the main meal, and you would make a bracha. But of course, you should ask your local posek to address any particular situations. So, in any event, the bottom line is that we say that you can do all of these things, and so now we ask a related question. So the Gemara introduces now the question of waiting between meat and milk. So boy mine Rav Asi mi Rabbi Yochanan. Kama yisha bein basar legvina. How long do you need to wait between meat and milk, meaning eating meat first and then eating milk? Amar le v'lo klum. You don't have to wait at all. Don't stop there because that's a very confusing statement. Aini, is that right? But one second, Rav Chisda says specifically that if you eat meat, then you cannot eat milk right after. You cannot have cheese right after. But gvina muter lechol basar. But if you have cheese, you can eat meat right after. So that seems very odd that you're telling me that Rabbi Yochanan said that there's no requirement to wait. Ella, rather, what actually happened, and the question was, Kama Yisha ben Gvina levasar. The question was in the other direction. Amar lei, and so Rabbi Yochanan responded, "V'lo klum." You don't need to wait. So now it's completely consistent with Rav Chisda. Just like Rav Chisda says you don't need to wait after meat, after having milk to have meat, so too does Rabbi Yochanan. So Gufa, Rav Chisda, Achol Basar, Asur Lechol Gvina, Gvina Mutar Lechol Basar. 1 second. So you have Rav Chisda's statement that says that after you eat meat, you cannot have milk, cannot have cheese, but after you have cheese, you're allowed to have meat. So Amar le Rav Acha bar Yosef le Rav Chisda. So Rav Acha asks, Basar shebein hashinayim mahu. What's the story with the meat that is stuck between your teeth. Meaning, is that the basis for your concern? Meaning, or is that supplement your concern so that as a result you need to be concerned about that? Is that still considered meat? So Rav Chisda explained, Kari ale habasar odenu ben hashinehem. So quoting the story in Bamidbar about the desire for the Jewish people by the Jewish people to want meat, and Hashem gives them the meat and then punishes them, and they were punished while the meat was still between their teeth. And what does that mean? What's the implication of that? The implication of that is that it was still called meat even though it was between their teeth. And so, as a result, the meat that is between your teeth still is considered meat, and you do need to be careful that you don't have any such meat in your mouth when you're having, cheese sometime later. So, Amar Mar Ukva, Ana laha milsa chala bar chamra legabi abba. Mar Ukva now introduces the time horizon that the horizons that we're more familiar with. That by noting that he was like vinegar compared to the wine of his father. What does that mean? Deilu abba ki hava achil bisra ha'idna. If his father would eat meat now, lo hava achil gvina ad lamachar ki hashta. He would wait until tomorrow at this time, meaning he would wait exactly 24 hours between having meat and milk. V'ilu ana, but I, it's only in this meal that I don't eat milk. But But for the next meal, I do eat cheese. I will eat dairy. And Tosos notes that when he says the Seuda, Tosos indicates a relative leniency. The Seuda sa achrina. It's the third Tosos on Kovhei Amid Aleph. Achilna lab beseudas sheragun laazos achas shachars v'achas arvis. We're not talking about waiting from the breakfast meal to the evening meal. Ela afilu la'alter, even earlier. Im silek hachol shulchan, if you clean off the table, ubeirech, and you make and you bench and you conclude with the bracha for your last meal, mutter. It is permitted to have cheese. Delo plug rabbanim, because the rabbis didn't make a distinction, and so as a result, this is the basis for not having milk and meat at this milk after meat at the same meal. But if you wait until the time for your next meal, so that would be the basis to wait. And so that's the basis to wait relatively shorter periods of time. Okay, so Amar Shmuel. Shmuel now says back into the Gemara. We are the Amar is the last word on the counting up from the narrow lines of the Gemara. It's 6, 9, 12, 15.
Is the Gemara going to discuss the difference between hard cheese and soft cheese at some point?
At some point. So, well, yes, we'll discuss it shortly because we have to understand what the reason is in connection with meat and milk, and I don't think we covered that yet. But let's give me until the end of today, and we'll see whether we'll talk about that. Okay, Amr Shmuel, Analaha Milsa. It actually may be tomorrow. Analaha Milsa Chala Bar Chamra Lagabi Abba. So we said in one way where Mer Ukva made the same kind of comment about being vinegar relative to his father's wine. So Shmuel also made that statement. And what did he make that statement about? He said that I'm vinegar like my father's wine. Di'ilu Abba Havasayer Nichse Tre Zimne Biyoma. My father would take a look at all of his properties twice a day to make sure that everything was handled properly. But I only do it once per day. And Rashi tells us, Siyar, it's basically if we take a look from the Tosos on the left-hand side of the Seudasa, and we go to the right-hand side, it's one or two lines down from where that Tosos is. Sayer, Holich v'roa karka osav. He would go and check out his properties. Mahain srichot. What do they need? Is everything okay with the properties? And so while his father would do so twice a day, he would do it once a day. And Shmuel Taimeh, back into the Gemara, it would be, and now this is the first word on the line, and we're 3, 6, 9, 12, 13 lines up from the narrow lines of the Gemara. Shmuel Taimeh de Amar Shmuel man desir nichse kol yoma mishkach astera. That if you check out your properties every day, you will find an astera. What is an astera? Mishkach astera. Next Rashi, motze sela. You'll find a coin. You'll find some money. Mitaknem b'kol hatzarich. You'll be able to fix anything that needs fixing with respect to your property. This is basically the concept of a stitch in time saves nine. That you want that every time you have a chance, that if you keep an eye on something and make sure that you fix it quickly, you'll be able to save significant resources. And so Abaye habasayer nichse kol yoma b'yoma. So Abaye would do this. He would check out his property every day. Yom echad paga ba'arise dedare piska deofe. One day he ran into his sharecropper, his aris, and he saw him carrying a bundle of wood. And Rashi tells us, next Rashi, Piska deofe, mishve eitzim, a load of wood, shahaya gonvo. He was in the process of stealing it. So it was precisely because Abaye was checking his property every day that he caught his sharecropper trying to steal from him. So Amrle, Hani Lehecha, where are you taking this wood? So Amrle, thinking quickly, the sharecropper responds, Levei Mar, I'm taking it to my master's house, namely to your house. So Amrle, Abaye knew that he was lying and wanted to highlight that fact. So Kvar Kadmuch Rabbanan, the rabbis already figured it out, figured you out. What does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Sha'amru, they said, Sheyehei Adam Roa Nechasav B'Kol Yom, that people should check out the property every day. V'yirim Mayasa, and they'll know what happens to it. And so as a result, they told me to look out for this exact thing, and that's why I was able to catch you. And as a result, I didn't lose any money. And that is the end of that story. Rav Asi, next story, back into the Gemara.
I was thinking of checking an Eruv. I mean, granted, this is every day, but when you first began, I'm thinking that's the idea by checking the Eruv every week to make sure
Yeah,
it's up.
could be. I don't know that this is a specific site for that concept, but
I understand,
but yeah. So Rav Asi have a sayer nichse kol yom. So Rav Asi also followed Shmuel's advice and would check out his property every day. Amar, but he was wondering because he never saw anything wrong. So Amar Heika Ninhu Kol Hani Astire Demar Shmuel. Where are all these asteras that Shmuel talked about? Well, now we're going to find out. Yom Echad, one day, Chazat Sinora Debidka Ba'are. He saw a stream coming through a crack. And all through his property. And so he had to worry that maybe this water was going to ruin all of his property because there was a crack in the watering canal that would be used to ensure that there was sufficient water for all of his produce. But you can't have too much water. So here, this crack was going to cause a flooding of his field. Shikli leglime karve osve begava. So he took his coat, he rolled it up, and he put it into the crack so that it wouldn't leak. Ramakala, he raised his voice to shout out, asking for help. Asu inshi sakruha. So people came and they closed it up. They closed up the hole. So Amar, so he said, Ashkechtinu lakulo istere demar Shmuel. I found all of the isteres that Shmuel promised, because in fact, right, the only reason that I was able to save my entire field, which of course is worth lots of isteras and its entire produce, is because I checked on it every day. So again, good advice is that if you need a site for the fact that we should be careful about all of our property. We saw a couple days ago, a couple weeks ago, about the Yaakov's going back for his small kalim, which highlighted the fact that tzaddikim are concerned about their property because they don't want to engage in any kind of theft, and so as a result, they want to make sure that everything that they have is used properly. This is can be considered a part of that concept that we need to make sure that we don't throw away money, that we don't waste the resources that we have. And so you do need to spend some time thinking about how you are investing and all the things that you're doing and making sure that the property that you have is being used correctly. Okay.
Boy puts the finger in the dike to stop the water flow.
That's correct, 100%. And hopefully, his when he raises his voice, he can be heard, and other people will come to help him. Okay, so Amar of Idi bar Avin, Amar of Yitzchak bar Ashyan. So now, yesterday we discussed washing hands between meat and milk. So the Gemara discusses now washing hands a little bit more. Now it's not just about between meat and milk, but also at the beginning of the meal and at the end of the meal. This is going to be one of the key citations for the concept of Mayim Achronim. So Rav Idi bar Avin said in the name of Rav Yitzchak bar Ashyan, Mayim Rishonim mitzvah, that washing ahead of a meal, meaning before you have bread, that is going to be a mitzvah. That is a command that we have to do. V'achronim, but washing at the end of the meal, chova, that is a total obligation. And
How do you Rashi explains that difa mimi mitzvah? A chova is greater than a
Yeah,
mitzvah.
well, we'll see why that it's a greater than a mitzvah. Okay, we'll get to the reasoning of why it's greater than a mitzvah. That it's meaning that when it comes to a mitzvah, there's an idea that sometimes if God forbid you're in a situation where you can't do it, so then okay. But when it's something more serious that's involved, as we will see, that Mayim Achronim is viewed as a life or death question, or at least a very significant harm to health question. So
The Melech Sodomit.
exactly that's where we're going to go. So you're absolutely right. So that's going to be why it's a chova as opposed to just a mitzvah. So meisvei. But one second, before we get there, hey, you're telling me that there's a difference between Mayim Rishonim and Mayim Achronim because Mayim Rishonim is mitzvah and Mayim Achronim are chova. But I'll show you that there's another statement where Mayim Rishonim v'Achronim chova. There's a brisa that says that both the Rishonim and the Achronim are chova and emtsaim rishus, and the middle ones are rishus. So that seems to disagree with what you just said, Rav Idi. So no, it doesn't disagree. Mitzvah legabi rishus chova karilei. Well, one second. When we talk about a mitzvah, that is no longer in the category of rishus, and so as a result, when you compare mitzvah to rishus, it's also considered chova. So it's not precise language that our brisa was using, but it is still accurate, and therefore it's not inconsistent. As Rashi says, from the bottom of Rashi, we're now 3, 6, 9, 12, 13 lines up. Mitzvah legabi rishus chova karila. Mishum detani emtsaim v'hadaihu. Because the middle one is learned with it, and and is called a rishus, kari l'rishonim chova. So the first one is also called a chova. Da'afal pisha einan ela mitzvah, because even though it's only a mitzvah, chashivos hein eitzel harishus likrotam chova. It's more important than something that is just permitted or just voluntary, and therefore we're going to call it obligatory. So even though it might not be at the same level of obligation as the Mayim Achronim, it's still going to be an obligation. So gufa.
What
So
is the
now
MCE? What, is there a third type of water?
yes, we're going. Yes, well, absolutely. We're going to see that it's washing between different courses, and we'll
Okay.
see whether or not it also implies meat versus milk. right? Because we've seen that there's a requirement to wash between meat and milk. And so we're going to see that, and that's going to relate back to our conversation that we had at the end of the day yesterday. So Gufa, Mayim Rishonim. So now we're going to quote the entire brisa. It's a long brisa. We'll have an aside in the middle of it, but let's take a look at the brisa. So Mayim Rishonim ve'achronim chova. The waters at the beginning of the meal and the end of the meal are an obligation. Emsa'is rishus. The middle ones are voluntary. Rishonim notlim bein bekli bein al gabi karka. When it comes to the first water, you can wash over the ground or into a vessel. Doesn't make a difference. Achronim ein notlim ela bekli. But when it comes to the end water, you should only wash into a vessel. You shouldn't wash onto the ground. Va'amrila, and we'll see why shortly. And they said about it that not maybe it wasn't that you shouldn't wash into a vessel, but ein notlin al gabi karka. Could be that it was saying that you shouldn't wash onto the ground. So my beinayu, so the Gemara now asks, 1 second, you have these two alternative views of the text of this brisa. What's the difference between them? So Ika benayu, there is a difference. There's an important difference. Kinsa. So what are kinsa? So Rashi helps us out. Kinsa. Take a look at Rashi. It's 3, 6, 8 lines up. Last word on the line. Kinsa. Im notain shapa eitzim. That if you put the chips of wood, viksamim, and like splinters, tachtehen, underneath where you are going to wash. So leman de amar kli hachalav klihu. So according to the first view of the language of this brisa, where it says you need to pour the mayim achronim into a vessel, well then this would not be a vessel, and that would be problematic. Ulamanda amar ein nolan al gabi karka, but according to the viewpoint that says you don't wash on the ground, shapir dummy, it would be okay. We're going to see that the reason you don't want to pour on the ground is because of the bad spirits, shora alayhan, that are in that water. Kishehin al gabi karka, which exists when it's specifically on the ground. But here it would not be on the ground, it would be on wood chips, and therefore it's not going to be a problem. And according to the second view, that you have to just not do it on the ground. And so that's the difference between these two viewpoints. So back into quoting the Baraisa. So now we are 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up, middle of the line from the bottom of Kuf Hey Amud Aleph. Mayim Rishonim Notlim Ben Bechamin Ben Bitzonin. When it comes to the original water that you wash at the beginning of the meal, you can use either hot or cold. Achronim Ein Notlin Ela Bitzonin. But when it comes to the washing at the end of the meal, you should only use cold water. Because if they're hot, then you're like spreading mivapeya es hayadayim. You're spreading what's on the hands, meaning there is this kind of greasy. If you eat with your hands get kind of greasy. And when you have warm water or hot water, it doesn't necessarily, especially if you don't use soap, right? It's going to sort of melt that grease and get it more all over your hands and not necessarily wash your hands off. That's why sometimes if you have fat on your plate, for example, it's easier to get that fat off, or at least some of the fat off, when you wash it in cold water than when you wash with hot water, which again melts the fat and then and spreads it around. So that's the importance of soap. So but we're not dealing with a situation where they had soap. So as a result, that's why you have to be careful and you have to wash after the meal with cold water. Ve'ein ma'avirin es hazahuma, because if you don't actually if you use hot water, you're not going to get rid of all of the filth that's on your hands. So now we analyze this aspect of the brisa. So Mayim Rishonim Notlim Ben Becham and Ben Bitzonin. We said you could use hot or cold water to wash at the beginning of the meal. Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef Rav Yanai Lo Shanu Ela She'ein Hayad Soledes Behen. As we turn to Kuf Hey Amud Bet. When we say that you can use hot water, we don't mean that you can use such hot water that your hand would retract from it, meaning it's boiling. Of al hayad soletis behen, but if your hand would retract from that level of water, Ein Notlin Behen. Well, then you're not allowed to use it even for Mayim Rishonim. And there are some who say that no, no, no. The statement of a Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef in the name of Rabbi Yanai was not made about Mayim Rishonim. It was made about Mayim Achronim. Achronim ein notlin ela bitzonein, aval b'chamin lo. But when it says that you cannot use hot water to wash at the end, it means Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yanai, Lo Shanu Ela Yad. So let us ben. When we say hot water, we mean boiling hot water, scalding hot water. Aval ein hayad. So let us ben. But if it's not that hot, well, then then it still will help you clean your hands off, and it won't result in just spreading around the filth, and therefore that would be sufficient. Okay, so miklal, what's the implication then if we say that hot water it means that it's scalding hot water. Derishonim afal pisha yad. So let us behen mutter. The implication of the second read of this, if Rabbi Yanai's statement is on the end of the brisa, the implication is that when it comes to using mayim rishonim, that you would be allowed to use scalding hot water. Okay, so emsaim rishus. We then noted that our brisa said that the middle waters are optional. Amar Rav Nachman lo shanu ela bein tafshil tafshil. That's just talking about between dishes that you don't have to wash your hands, but you can continue to eat with your hands. But when you go from one dish to the next, aval bein tavshil legvina chova. But if you are going from a tavshil, here understood to mean some dish with meat in it, and then you're going to milk, well, then obviously you would need to wash your hands. This is obviously before the understanding of the time frame that's associated with it, and so as a result, that's why more likely, or as likely, it's referring to a situation where the cheese is first. That's how at least some of the commentators understand that this must be referring to.
How does the Gemara leave this statement unanswered? Miklal devishonim afal pisha yad soledet bo mutard. I mean, we would think that if the water is that boiling, it would be dangerous. And why would there would not be a discussion or mention, a retort here saying you shouldn't be using water that's that hot, but you can burn your hands.
Well, I think the question of exactly what temperature Yad Soledes Behen is a very interesting debate because it does not mean so hot that you would actually burn yourself, but rather it's hot enough that you would withdraw your hand if you weren't ready for it. But meaning if in fact it's scalding, then how could you possibly even wash your hands with it? And so the understanding is, meaning what does it mean that you can use really hot water for it? The point is that if various people have different sensitivities to different temperatures, and even though it might be pretty darn hot, and if I wasn't expecting it, I might withdraw my hand from it. But if I know that it's coming, so especially if I build myself up to it, if I start with a warm and then move myself up into hotter and hotter, I can tolerate heat that I might have withdrawn my hand from if I just started with that without any warning. And so as a result, the point is that we're not talking about a heat level that would actually cause any damage to a person. It's just hot enough that you wouldn't have put your hand on it to start with. You would want to start with a less hot water in order to get used to it. And the point is that even if that happened, and the question is was it a good washing ahead of time? If you did wash your hands with that kind of water, you could still still continue. You can make the bracha of al netilas yadayim, and you can then have your hamotzi. You don't need to wash a second time. So if somebody accidentally, turns on the hot water, and pours you and if you're in line at a simcha and you're using the faucet and somebody turned on the hot water and it's a little hot, the water in your washing cup, you don't have to wash again. You can just go ahead and continue with your brachot of al netilas yadayim, and then make hamotzi. So, but the bottom line is that when we say and this is the key element for why this whole discussion is brought here, is the fact that when we talk about washing being voluntary, it is only when you are not moving from meat to milk, or milk, or more properly, from milk to meat. If you are moving from milk to meat, well, then you need to wash your hands in addition to everything else. And that, of course, was exactly what we saw at the end of the day yesterday, where we noted that if it's daylight and you can see clearly what's on your hands, or if Baruch Hashem, we have lighting today, and you have good lighting, well, then if you could see that your hands are clean, you are okay even without washing your hands. Okay, so now we continue on and we understand why we're going to explain the reasoning of why we have to be careful about Mayim Achronim so much. So Amr of Yehuda Breida Rabbi Chia. B'mnei ma'amru Mayim Achronim Chova. Why are we saying that the water washing your hands at the end is considered an obligation? Shemelach Sodomis yesh shemisame es hainayim. Because there is this salt from Sodom that is going to blind one's eyes. So Amr Abaye umishtkach kikurta bechora, that there is going to be one kurta, one grain of it in every core of regular salt, and therefore one needs to be careful about it. So Amar le Rav Acha Brei de Rava le Rav Ashi. So Rav Acha asked Rav Ashi, Kol milcha mai. Now this kol means every or all, but actually it can mean something else as well. And Rashi tells us what it means in this context. Kol milcha madad melech. It means if you measured, and then it cites the pasuk in Shmo Tetzayin, where again the word kol can mean some kind of measurement. So kol milcha mai. So if you measure salt, what's the story? Meaning, even if you're not eating, do you have to be worried about that? So Amar le Rav Ashi said, Lo mi bai. Of course you have to be worried about it. Certainly you have to be worried about it. So as a result, this is why I got confused at the beginning. Here, lo mi bai means you certainly have to be worried about it, whereas earlier, lo mi bai, it's not a question, was that you don't need to do it. So it's a little confusing. You have to know the context of each situation. So now that we had Abaye mentioned, we're going to first mention why it is that Abaye is going to have 8 different situations where he had an initial opinion that was clarified by Rabbah, who is the reference to Mar here. Now, the first of these relates directly to our topic. So, and we'll see whether hopefully we'll get through all of them. So, Amar Abaye, Miresh Hava Amina. Originally, I used to say, the Hai Delo Mashu Maya Basrai Al Ara. The fact that we don't use the ladder waters on the ground, Mishum Zuama. It's because it's all filthy, and we don't want the ground to get filthy. So Amar Limar, but Rabbah told me, no, it's not because of the filth. Rather, Mishum Desharya Ruach Ra'alayu. It's because the evil spirits are on it, and so as a result, that's the reason that we have to be careful about that. And so that is item number 1 on the list. V'amar Abaye, more another statement. Mereish Hava Amina. Originally, I used to say, Hai Delo Shakel Midi Mipsora Mipatora. That why is it that a person doesn't take something from the table when somebody else is drinking at the table, meaning you don't remove food and concept and other things from the table when people are still eating. That's just so I thought, why is that the case? Shema Yera, Dabar Kalkala Besuda. Maybe something bad will happen at the meal, meaning, and Rashi explains what's going to happen. um it's now Rashi, it's in the narrow lines, from the top of the narrow lines, 9 lines down, last word on the line, davar kalkala, shema yichos hashosa. Maybe the person who's drinking will get upset that you're removing something. Shechayfetz ba'oto davar. He wants the item that you're taking. Hanitel, the davar hanitel, the thing that you're taking off the table. V'chiyachis, and he'll get upset, yistakein, and he'll be in a dangerous situation. Vayichanek, and he'll choke. And so as a result, yeah, you have to be careful not to startle somebody while they're drinking. And this could startle the person and have him upset. And now he'll God forbid, not do well. So that's what I thought the reason was. But Amrli Mar explained to me, Rabbi explained, Mishum Dekashi L'Ruach Tzarda. No, it's because it can trigger the Tzarda spirit. Velo amran ella deshakil velo mother. But when we say that it's going to trigger the tzarda spirit, that's if you take something off and you don't bring it back. Aval mishkava duri leitlan ba leislan ba. But if you take it away and then you bring it back, that's not going to be problematic. Velo amran ella chutzla arba amos. And also, when I say that you have to take it away and it's a problem, that's if you take it away more than 4 amos. Aval toch arba amos leislan ba. But if you leave it if you just take it off the table and put it on the side table that's right there, that's not going to be a problem. Velo amran ella midi tzarich l'seudasa. And also, when we talk about this, we're talking about something that you need for the meal. Aval midi lo tzarich l'seudasa leislan ba. But if it's not necessary for the meal, then you don't need it. Now, what's considered necessary? So Mar bar Rav Ashi kapit afilu a isusa uvuchna de table, that he would even be careful not to take away the mortar and pestle for spices, because that is something that people want to have at the meal. Midi de because that's considered something that's necessary for the meal. So that was item number 2 in our list of 8 items where Abaye had an initial thought that was corrected by Rabbah. For Amar Abaye, so Abaye says again, Me reish hava mina. Originally, I used to say, Hai dechashnshe nashvara. That why do we gather all of the crumbs? Mishum minakirusa, because we want to be clean. We don't want to mess underneath our table. So Amrli Mar, but Rabbah corrected, Mishum dekashi la'aniyusa. No, that is if you are disrespectful to your property and you allow things to be a mess, well, then that is a sign that can trigger poverty. Hahu Gabra, and in fact, there was somebody, Dahava Mahadar Ale Sara Anuyusa. There is apparently an angel of poverty that was trying to get this person, Velo Hava Yakale, but he was never able to get him because he was always respectful about the crumbs, because Zahir Anashvara Tuva, he was very careful about those crumbs. Yomachad Karech Rifta Ayavle. Well, one day he was eating over some grass. So Amar, the angel, thought to himself, Hashta Vadei Nafel Bidai. Oh, now he's definitely going to be in my hands, because he's never going to be able to clean up after himself. But what did he do? Basar Da'achil Aitumara. He came and he took a shovel. Akrinu liyavle shadinu lenara, and he uprooted all the grass and threw it all into the river. And so, as a result, he cleaned up the crumbs even from the grass. So Shameh to Kamar. So the angel was heard that he was saying, "Voy, oi for me." The apke hahu gabra mi beise. This guy has thrown me out of his house. He's not allowing me to make him poor. So again, being respectful to all your possessions and to even the possessions that you're throwing out, highlights a kind of respect, that if you show that kind of respect to your things, so then Hashem will continue to allow you to have those kinds of things. Amar Abaye, Meiresh Hava Amina. Initially, I used to say, hi, delo, shasi, ufya. The fact that people don't drink the foam that's on top of a beverage, if you have a beer, you'll have some foam at the top. Mishum miyususa is because it was disgusting. Amar Limar, but Mar explained to me, no, Mishum de Kashi Karsam. It's because it can trigger Karsam. What is Karsam? So Rashi tells us, Ririn Haban Minachotim. It's a mucus that comes from your nose. It can, you have basically a constant runny nose if you have this foam. So Mishjay Kasha Lakarsam. If you drink the foam, then that's going to be bad for this mucus issue. Minapech be kashya laresha. If you blow it, then that's going to cause headaches. Medichaye kashya and and if you push it aside and put it onto the ground, that would, meaning like you're throwing it away essentially. That would be a symbol of an indication of poverty. So my taknate. So how do you fix this issue? What should you do? So l'shakye, shakuye, let it sink. Don't if you pour yourself a soda and it's got a nice foam to it, let the foam sink on its own. Don't drink it. Don't throw it away. Just let it eventually bubble down, and you'll have it then. L'charsam techamra shikra. If you get karsam as a result of beer, what should you drink? I'm sorry, as a result of chamra, as a result of wine, shikra, drink some beer. De shikra, if you got karsam as a result of drinking the foam of beer, maya, have some water. De maya, but if you had this karsam because you drank some water that had a foam on it, leis le takanta. There's no fix for it. So v'hainu damri inshi, and that's what people say, that basar anya azla anyusa, that poverty follows the poor, because here this person could not afford anything other than water, and of course the water probably wasn't even that clean, and that's probably why it had a foam on it in the first place. And now that this person got this disease, there's no way to fix it because there's no antidote to it. And so that shows that when you have bad things follow bad things. Okay, so that's number 4 on our list. V'amar Abaye. Abaye also said, Miresh Haba. I used to think, Hai delo achla yarka mikisha de asar gina. That why don't we eat from greens that have been bundled together? Mishum de michze kira uvutuna. Tanusa. It's because you appear to be ravenous and extraordinarily hungry, and that's disrespectful. So Amrli Mar, but Mar explained to me, no, Mishum de Kashi Shafim. It's because of witchcraft, and we're concerned about. And we have a story that highlights that because Rav Chisda Barabba Bar Rav Huna Havu Kaazli Ba'arba. They were going on a boat. Amrulahu Hahi Matranusa, a matron woman wanted to go with them. Osvan Bahadaiku, let me sit with you. Alo Asvua, but they did not allow her on the boat. Amra Milsa, she said something. Asarta La'arba. So as a result, the boat could not move. Amru Inhu Milsa. So they said something. Sharyuha, and the boat was able to go again. Amra Lahu, she said to them, My Abid Lahu, what can I do to you? Delo mekanech lechu bechaspa. You don't wipe yourselves with shards of pottery. V'lo kata lechu kina amanaichu. You don't kill a louse on your clothing. V'lo achol lechu yarka mikisha de asar ginai. And you don't eat from the vegetables that have been bundled, that have been tied by the gardener. And so as a result, since you don't do any of these things, my magic is not working on you. You have the antidotes to all of those things. And so it highlights that you should be careful not to do all of these items. Amar Abaye Meresh Haba. I used to think, Hi, delo achle yaraka denafal mitaka mishum ususa. That why don't we eat vegetables that fall off the table? It's because they're disgusting. Amrli Mar, but Mar explained to me, no, it's not because of they're disgusting, but rather mishum de kasha l'reach hapet, because it causes bad breath. V'amra Abaye mereish Amina. Originally, I used to think, Haigalo Yosvi to say merziva. Why don't people sit underneath a drain pipe? Mishum shofchim, because of the water coming out of it. So Amrli Mar, but Mar explained to me, no, Mishum Teshchiche Mazikin. It's because there are demons there. So let me tell you a story. Hanu Shakolai, there were some carriers. Dahabu Daru Chavisa Techamra. They were carrying some wine, a barrel of wine. Bola Itapchuche. They wanted to rest. Osvua Tuse Merzeva. They went and sat under a drain pipe. Pucka, the drain pipe, the barrel of wine burst, and they lost all of their wine. Asul de Mar Baravashi. They came in front of Mar Baravashi in order to try and see what they could do to get some kind of justice. Apik Shipure Shamte. So he took out the shofars and he excommunicated the demon that caused the problem. Asal Kameh. So the demon finally comes to before Mar Barabashi. So Amrle, so Mar Barabashi asks him, Amai Tavid Haki, why did you do this? So Amrle, he explained, Hey Kievin, Ki Osve Unai. What am I supposed to do? He put this thing in my ear when I was sleeping. So Amrle, At beduchta deshchichi rabim, my bias. What are you doing in a place where there's public? Atu dishanis, you're the one who acted improperly. You changed what was the right behavior. Zil shalom, go and pay them. So Amrle, the demon said, Hasha nami likbali mar zimna ve'efra. So give me some time. Tell me when I need to pay them by, and I'll take care of it. Kavale zamna. So they set a time. So kimata zimna Yaakov. But when the time came, he didn't go. He stayed away. So ki asa. Eventually, he came with the money. Amrlai. So Mar Barabashi said to him, Amilo asis bezimnach. Why didn't you come on time? Amrlai. So the demon explained, Kol mili ditzayer v'chasim v'chayom umini leislan reshusa lemishkamine. Anything that is wrapped, sealed, measured, or counted, I don't have the right to take. Adamishkachinan midi behafkara. It's got to be something that is completely ownerless. That is when I have the right to get involved, and as a result, I didn't have the right to get involved here until just now, and so that's why it took me longer to find something. And it's interesting because also we say with respect to bracha that when something is wrapped, sealed, specifically when it's measured or counted, then we don't have a bracha come on it. And so this highlights the fact that Hashem works sort of when in the shadows, and so as soon as something becomes out of the shadows, so then you're not going to have a bad things happen to it, but you're also not going to have necessarily good things happen to it. So v'amar Abaye meireish havamina. Initially, I used to think that hai deshade maya mipuma dechatzba. That why did we spill out some of the water at the top of a pitcher before drinking from it? Mishum tzivsa. It's because of the splinters that would float on the surface of the water. So Amar Mar explained to me, Mishum deika mayim haroim. No, it's because there are some harmful waters. So Hahu Bar Sheda Dahababe Rav Papa, that there was this shade, this demon that was in the house of Rav Papa, and Rashi tells us Dahava Rav Papa Shahaya Mishamsho. It was an assistant to Rav Papa. It would help Rav Papa. So Azalatuye Mayim Minahara, and it went to bring the water from the river. Iyakev, but it didn't bring the water right away. Kiasa, when it did eventually bring the water from the river. Amrulay. So they said to him, Amai Iyakavat. Why did it take you so long? So Amr Lahu, Mayim Haraim. I had to wait for harmful waters to pass. Adahachi. But then immediately after that, Chazanhu de Kashadu Mayam Mipuma de Chatzba. The demon saw that they poured out the top of the water from the pitcher. Amar, and he said, Ihabi Yadana de Regilisu Lemevid Hachi Loiakve. If I had known that you regularly did this, that you would pour off the top water, I wouldn't have delayed. I would have been able to bring you back even the bad water because you would have been able to fix it by pouring off the top water. So those are the 8 stories of Abaye having an initial thought about something and how it was eventually corrected. The Gemara returns to washing and what happens when one fails to do so. But for that discussion, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Looking forward to continuing our learning together.